Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Chatting the Pictures. I'm Cara Finnegan. I write and teach about photography.
And I'm Michael Shaw, publisher of Reading the Pictures. Welcome.
Okay, here we are, Michael. We've got several of these episodes under our belt now. I'm starting to feel slightly competent. I hope our audience
Uh-oh.
agrees. I think I just set us up for a big fail today, right?
No, we need to do some polling.
Yeah, I know. Everyone will be like, yeah, looking out for the extra special oomph of today. I don't know. I can't promise anything. But we do have some great photos to talk about, don't we?
Yeah, we really do. And I was trying to come up with a theme, and what struck me was threats, deadly agents, and bad actors. And what's interesting too about these photos is that these are situations that are actually like pretty complex. So I think the photos and all the different photos, variations on these photos that were out there in the media, really challenge us to try and understand, what these situations mean through the images, and then also through like an enormous amount of media coverage. So, do you want me to give you can we put up the first one?
Yeah. I think you're right. I think this is a really complicated set of images, and one of the things that's it's always fun to do is to see how we can distill down a complicated week of events into a short discussion. Okay,
Yes.
so here we have Mark Zuckerberg's, plural.
A fake book.
Yes, yeah.
This photo was taken by a really great photographer who shoots for the Washington Post. His name is Michael Robinson Chavez, and the caption is very abbreviated because at least I pulled this from Instagram. But what it shows is a display that was set up by the activist organization, online organization called Chavez, and what they did is they put up dozens of these Mark Zuckerberg cutouts on the grounds of the Capitol with the characteristic signature, the sans serif font that Facebook uses, and the T-shirts all read fixed fake book. And then also kind of an interesting detail is that they're almost, I think they're real height. So they're all like 5'6", 5'7", which we all know that's how tall Zuckerberg is now based on the coverage.
Yeah, because apparently that was a factoid we all needed to learn this week. Yeah,
very important. And then the group said that the cutouts represent, this is a quote, a fake troll army of Mark Zuckerberg's. So their press release said that the display was meant to draw attention to the bots and other fake accounts that were partly responsible for spreading disinformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about this photo is it invites us to think about what we might call the image event itself. So the act of this activist group placing these this cardboard cutout army of Mark Zuckerberg's on the Capitol lawn. And then we can also think about what the photo is doing with that display. And if you go online, you get a lot of different variations of what different photographers did with the photo, in terms of how they composed their images of it. A couple of things I just thought I would say about the cutouts themselves. A couple of choices. I think you pointed out the kind of appropriation of using the Facebook font and the navy blue kind of look, right? So you have to look twice really to see that it says fake book and not Facebook. The other thing I thought was really interesting, especially in light of some of the conversations about Zuckerberg's testimony this week, is their choice to use what appears to me to be a younger, closer to college-aged Mark Zuckerberg, right? So
nice.
there is in this narrative, I think we saw this week, this kind of back and forth between Zuckerberg is the boy wonder. There's always still this narrative of, he's this sort of boy genius who unleashed this thing in the world and maybe doesn't quite understand what exactly happened. And then therefore somehow maybe isn't as responsible, I think, by extension. And then the Zuckerberg we saw, who is, has a much more shaped head, is wearing a suit and tie, is, clearly not the one in this picture. And so I found that really interesting because in some ways it picked up on some of the narratives about, is Mark Zuckerberg a boy genius, or is he a male? Is he an adult male capitalist, and therefore more responsible, maybe for things. And then there's the photo too, which, there's a number of compositional choices that the photographer made, right? Do you want to weigh in on that a little bit? Because I think you're right. Chavez's photo is really great.
Well, Mark's big head, quote unquote, and then the relation to the capital, that he's bigger than he dominates the capital, that Silicon Valley and these icons of the Valley are just, they're more powerful. They overshadow. And I know that there is, Zuckerberg has a personal photographer who is a former campaign and political photographer. And he did this tour last year where no one could tell whether or not he was running for president. And he'd sit down with citizens, people that were Facebook users. They'd call them up, and he'd have a meal with them. And he was like quoted over and over saying, like, why would I want to be president? I'm not running for president. I have like a much better job. Like ostensibly I got a lot more power. So
yeah, I actually got interviewed by a journalist in France who wanted to talk about whether I thought those photographs and their style meant that he was going to run for president, which I thought was interesting. He basically said, they look a lot like Pete Souza's, don't they? What do you think? Maybe Zuckerberg, believes that he's at a grander position. I really read, the thing I like about this photo as opposed to the other photos that I saw is precisely what you said, that it really, there's this power relation set up between Congress, represented by the Capitol, and the Zuckerbergs. And to me, also the fact that, the Capitol's in the background, so it's almost like he's turning his back on them. And then the other thing is that this image, I think more than some of the others I saw, really de-emphasizes the physical material cutout nature of the event in the first place. So some of the other images you see people kind of walking around, or in a few that some activists from the organization were there with the little frowny face emoji, which they put over their faces, or the angry face emoji, which they put on kind of a sign. And then so you had live humans, activists there with this. And what I like about this is that this really, it's a photograph of an image event, but it really forces us to look at Zuckerberg as opposed to, oh, look at this funny thing these activists put on the Capitol lawn. Isn't this, visual, right?
Yeah, I also like another thing about the picture too is like the head in the clouds. Like you were saying, does Zuckerberg even understand what he's unleashed? And then that brings you to like this kind of the invasion of the body snatchers kind of aspect of this. And like you said, they've already like devoured the Capitol, and now they keep coming. There's a lot of questions in those hearings about, what is Facebook? And I think that, and it also brings up the whole nature of facing and the face, and how much is it Mark versus is it this thing that's way beyond Mark? But, is it a technology company, a media company, a communications company? This has that kind of, people don't know, and, it just is so looming. And I think this photo is looming. It's really disconcerting in that kind of way. It's humorous, but it's just the humor in a way like makes it even like a little bit more creepier and harder to understand what we're looking at and what we're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, in contrast to the next two photos we're going to talk about too, I think that notion of faces is really interesting because, Zuckerberg, right, is often referred to as being relatively affectless or being like a robot. There were a lot of jokes and memes about that going around this week with his testimony.
The bug eyes.
And yeah. And so the choice of that face for him, which also suggests, it's not a devious maniacal laughter kind of face where, he's, Dr. Evil or something like that, but it's also not a warm and friendly face. It's just a very blank kind of thing. And it, to me, that also represents this anxiety that there's this faceless entity out there that is doing things with our data and to us that we don't quite understand.
So
I guess we should move on to a big visual contrast with that point, right? Which is this photograph from Syria this week.
Sure. I'm not sure if you're gonna mention it, but I know we talked about it before. How sometimes with a major news event, there'll be 2 or 3 or 7 different pictures that circulate, and then sometimes there's one. And this one really was, I think, the photo of this horrific event. The caption reads, this image was released by the Syrian Civil Defense. White helmets, shows a child receiving oxygen through respirators following an alleged poison gas attack in the rebel-held town of Douma near Damascus. And it was circulated by the AP. Just a little bit of context, and maybe that's what's always missing, and maybe that's what's missing even in the jump ahead in the attack that happened last night. But Douma is east of Damascus, and the city has been a source of a rebel stronghold since the beginning of the civil war in Syria, and the Syrian government, backed by the Russians, have been making a concerted push over the last few months to completely retake Ghouta, and it looks like they've killed more than 1,600 people and forced thousands to flee over the last several years. And it looks like Douma, which is where this specific attack took place, it looks like the whole area is now finally going to fall. So that's your background.
Yeah. I think you're totally right about this being the picture that we tended to see, that we really saw this week. And I was thinking about why that is. And, I think there's a couple of things. If you look for other pictures of this particular attack, and they're there, and there are many more that are much more graphic than this. There are children whose faces are burned, who cannot open their eyes. Obviously, there's video of a lot of these things as well. Right. And so, in thinking about this photo as the photo that has gotten circulated, maybe arguably most widely. It's a photograph that taps into the horrors of war and the horrors of these events, but not in a way that is designed to physically recoil you, right? I mean, you should absolutely have an emotional response to this image. And we can talk about what are the things about this photograph that draw you in emotionally and really help you understand what's happening to these children. But it's important to think about, I think, that we're seeing this kind of image rather than images of much more obviously physically damaged children.
Yeah. Just to throw in right. To throw in really quickly, our tweet read, "Whereas corpses elicit fatalism, children stricken but not as desperately throws the focus on circumstances and urgency."
Yeah, I think that's exactly nailing it. And this called to mind another photo that became the photo from Syria 2 summers ago, the photograph of 5-year-old Omran Daknish, who was 5-year-old. He's primarily, people might remember him as the dust-covered child sitting alone in the ambulance. And that photo too, the same kind of thing. The child is clearly traumatized. Clearly you can read in his face, similar to these children, that something horrible is happening that they don't quite understand. It's extremely vulnerable image, but there's not, again, that kind of graphic obviousness to it. So what is it about these photos then, Michael? What is it that draws us in?
Well, I actually would go more to the particular, and then as opposed to the general. Maybe come back to that question, but this photo also has this similar kind of cognitive dissonance that the Zuckerberg photo does, I believe, because if you look at the girl, and she looks pretty put together. If you didn't see the boy, she might be like in a schoolroom, like sneezing or something. She's well dressed. She has a bow in her hair. She's got red nail polish. The boy, if you look on the right side, his hair is wet. He looks scruffier. So it's like, and he also is being administered aid. She has no aid. So it's like, is she more in despair in this situation and he's getting the assistance? They don't look, any more stricken one from the other. On the other hand, is he more representative of the city and the desperate situation there, where she's like shows more normality and resilience? So, I think this is another photo where these elements create a lot of confusion and disturbance, in a viewer, and make the situation. Actually, it's more true to us, the situation being as complex as it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, the bows in her hair, and the fact that they're pink and red and polka dotted, like you said, and the nail polish. In some ways, she's the way into the photograph for the viewer, because then you're drawn to the child who's, who's taking oxygen, who's more visibly in distress. So in some ways, you could think of her as she's our surrogate. She's confused. She is clearly experiencing something. The absence of adults, I think, also in this photo, again, like that same one from 2 years ago in Aleppo, is also of note, because there would be, imagine if there were even an adult hand holding the oxygen mask up to that young boy's face. Children without adults around who are clearly in distressing situations. That elicits, I think, a different kind of response in the viewer. So my response is not only, oh my gosh, this is evidence of this horrible thing that's happened in general and to these specific children, but are they alone? I mean, there's evidence of help in the form of the oxygen mask. We know the people who released the photo are helping, right? But it does create this kind of anxiety that, images of children in war do that, I think, in a different way than other kinds of war images.
There is one more element that's pretty interesting here that I almost missed, which is if you look in between the two children on the shelf, and that's a Syrian white helmet. And
oh, yes. Good catch. So,
and it dovetails very nicely with what you just said, because, they are the the source of the photo and the source of the rescue. But they're also, if we're talking about the Syrians, the government really putting down the rebellion, permanently, which is not something people are discussing in terms of the current military mission, et cetera. What happened to the white helmets? So
yeah, that's a good point.
Also.
Yeah, and so they're there kind of in the background, invisible and not. I think that's a really good point. Should we move on to our last photo?
Oh, absolutely.
Again, faces, very different faces here.
So we'd sort of already done our Michael Cohen tweets like Wednesday, Thursday, and then this thing hit Friday afternoon, and there was some wire photos that were in front of the Lowe's Regency Hotel on Park Avenue, and then this was shot by and there was some really great pictures that were on Twitter that were taken by a CNN producer. This was taken by a photographer for the Daily Mail, and that Michael Cohen's just being followed, everywhere he goes the minute he steps outside. But anyway, let's see. The Daily Mail caption to this said, "Awkward?" ? One of Cohen's pals was carrying a copy of the New York Post, which featured a front page story about the lawyer's client, Donald Trump, and former FBI Director James Comey. Little bit of context for people who aren't following all of this or following it voraciously. Trump and Cohen's lawyer went to court Friday in an effort to block the Justice Department from reading seized documents. And Cohen was not technically required to be there, but so here he is hanging out with these guys instead. I think this was at the same time that the hearing was going on. And we know the judge was not happy that Cohen wasn't there. So as just some extended background for like just how incredibly ironic it is that this friend of Cohen's was actually holding that copy of the Post. If you did not see the cover of the Post, it looks like Mafia Don. You would read that the Don, and you don't exactly know. It seems like it's just more fuel for the fire. But the cover of the New York Post yesterday had a picture, that photograph of Trump shaking hands with Comey when they first met in the White House, and this gigantic, and the cover's about Comey's book that is coming out. They had a preview of it, and so the little header says, or anchor text says, "Inside former FBI head James Comey's book," and then this gigantic title reads, "Me and the Don," and then there's two subpoints in it, and one says it was like talking to Sammy the Bull, and then the one says wanted me to probe quote unquote hooker vid. So and then at the very bottom it says the Post obtained an early copy of James Comey's new book, A Higher Loyalty, in which the fired FBI director compares President Trump to a mob boss. So that's probably more background than anybody ever wanted, but I'll step back now.
So
I watch my back now.
yeah. So this photo is so interesting in so many ways. First of all, it looks like a paparazzi photo, right? I mean, it just has that sort of grabbed off the street. We're following this guy. We're zooming in on this conversation. And so you get this feeling. I mean, it could be a paparazzi photo, or it could be like a screen grab from an episode of The Real Housewives or some kind of reality show, right? Where there's some sort of drama happening between these characters, but they're real people, but are they? And so there's that kind of component to it. It has the visual energy of the street and paparazzi and creeping around and following somebody. But then there's also this, I don't know what to call it. I mean, it's definitely this masculine, is a kind of Godfather-esque gesture, body posture, the way they're looking at each other. Yeah.
It's stereotypes.
Yeah, I mean, and part of the narrative, and looking at some edits of the other photos of this moment in general, it seemed to me that he was trying to his strategy, it might have been, I'm going to get all my buddies around me. I'm going to go out and be somewhere very public and draw attention to myself away from this other thing that I'm literally skipping right now, right? And maybe also, I don't know, as a kind of threat, that I'm out here and I have support. I'm not isolated by myself. So there's the sense of I'm with these people. And then even in this image, there's a sense of this image of support. But it's very, very, this is not like a warm and fuzzy energy at all. It's a very kind of, mafia-esque framing. And again, that the watches, the newspaper shoved under the arm, these are these just kind of little visual touches that invite us to tell a story anyway. I'm not sure what story they tell.
Yeah, if you see the wide angle shots and then you do see the video, it's very casual. This picture has that B movie, like really surreptitious, kind of dramatic aspect to it. But there was about 5 of these guys sitting around having a couple of them were smoking cigars, and it is this, and so it was very casual. And Michael Cohen, and probably this is why he's in so much trouble. You could speculate, is that there's just this cavalier attitude. It's like that they can do anything they want, and doesn't matter if anybody's watching or not watching. There's just this complete license that they take, and then the other figures, then just in terms of stereotypes, you go back to this, a man is known by the company he keeps. That applies, between Cohen and Trump and the rest of his world, which is now starting to be revealed as very shady. It's like a kind of different narrative. This more true narrative, I think, is probably now starting to manifest. But the other guys in the picture, again, it's stereotypes, but one guy's got his shirt unbuttoned to halfway down, and another, and wearing loafers and no socks, and cigar smoking, and it's kind of a particular type. And it's got, it's just got it just reeks of stereotype, sort of.
Yeah, and even if you go to the Daily Mail piece, they make quite in my view, excessive point of the fact that he's wearing like a $3,200 blazer, So it's, again, this sense of privilege, money, ostentatiousness, posturing. Yeah. It's a very gendered image, right? It's a very guy's guy kind of image, but as you point out, in this really particular way, but a way that's accessible to us because of popular culture. So that's interesting in the sense that it kind of brings us all back to what it's like to live in Trump land, right? This is where we are. This is what we see.
Well, it is where the investigation is heading also, because you're talking about surreptitious ties to shady figures around the world, and how they're tied into the real estate empire, and how much, then you start to see like money laundering as a motive, and like kind of more latent connections to Russia and Russian money. And then now you're starting to see, because they went after Cohen, you start to see Cohen as the fixer, Cohen in Prague, Cohen, meeting with Russians, and Cohen having knowledge of, and maybe even being a conduit in the emails, being released. So these references to the mob, these, we may not be talking about the mafia per se, but the Don, and when you can't tell the difference between the Don being Donald Trump and the mob boss. And by the way, it was reported that Cohen and the White House acknowledges that Cohen and Trump spoke yesterday afternoon, and people are speculating that that call did take place when Cohen was supposed to be in court, but was sitting out here, hanging out with his buddies. So, you can imagine that he's actually talking to Trump, or that he's waiting for Trump's call. So you see how all these things get tied together in this just beautiful, ingenious way, like in what looks like a still from The Godfather.
Yeah. Follow the money, right?
Follow the money. Exactly. Follow the money.
Well, on that pop culture note.
Yeah.
So we should wrap things up, right?
Yeah. We want to, again, thank everyone for watching. If you like what we're doing, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And then sign up for our Week in Review newsletter on readingthepictures.org. And we will have a replay posted on our website by tomorrow. And we hope to see you back again next week. It's just like every week seems to be, visually, tops the week before, which is, it's remarkable to say that.
Yeah, and I have to say, so a little behind the scenes, I get the photos, and I spend most of the week wondering, what are our photos going to be? And then I get them on Fridays, and it's all very exciting. So it's like a little holiday present for me at the end of the week. So, and then a pleasure to get to talk about them with you. So
Same here.
Thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Thanks a lot.